Welcome back, everyone, to our classroom called the College of Glycation. Once again, my name is Paul Reynolds. I'm a biomedical scientist and professor of cell biology. And today we're diving into a sobering topic. The topic is glycation and cancer, and we'll discuss emerging links and mechanisms. If you've been with us for previous episodes, you'll know that we've laid the groundwork on glycation, what it is, why it happens, and how it messes with your body's machinery. But today we're exploring how glycation doesn't just age you prematurely, it might also be fueling cancer, driving inflammation, and helping tumors to spread. This is a heavy topic, but don't worry, it's not all despair. We'll break it down, make it clear, and arm you with strategies to fight back. We'll cover the basics of glycation, its role in cancer progression, the inflammation connection, and how insulin resistance ties it all together. Plus, we'll wrap up with practical ways to protect yourself. And as always, we're grounding this in solid science. I'll talk about 8 key studies today that illuminate this topic of glycation in cancer. So let's start with the basics. If you've heard our earlier episodes, you know that glycation is like an unwanted house guest for your metabolism. It's a non-enzymatic process where sugar molecules like glucose stick to proteins, lipids, or even DNA, forming in the process sticky, dysfunctional compounds that we call advanced glycation end products or AGEs. Think of it as sugar that essentially glues up your body's machinery, making protein stiff, less functional, and sometimes even harmful. This happens naturally to some extent, but it is supercharged in conditions like hyperglycemia or high blood sugar, common in diabetes or insulin resistance. AGEs don't just sit around. They interact with a receptor called the receptor for advanced glycation end products, or RAGE, and that interaction will trigger inflammation and oxidative stress. It's like lighting a match in a dry forest, and as we'll see, this inflammatory fire might be a key player in cancer. For context, glycation isn't just a lab curiosity. It's implicated in aging, diabetes complications, and cardiovascular diseases. Check out previous episodes where we dive into each of those topics specifically. But today, let's zero in on its emerging role in cancer, a connection that's both alarming and actionable. So, how does glycation go from being a metabolic nuisance to a potential accomplice in cancer? Well, let's unpack it. Cancer is, at its core, uncontrolled cell growth. Tumors need energy, building blocks, and a permissive environment to thrive. Glycation, as it turns out, might be providing all three. First of all, let's talk about the energy angle. Cancer cells are notorious for their sweet tooth. They love glucose. This is called the Warburg effect, where tumors rely heavily on glycolysis even when oxygen is plentiful to churn out energy and raw materials for growth. High glucose levels, like those in hyperglycemia, feed this frenzy. But it's not just about the energy. Excess glucose also leads to more glycation, producing AGEs that wreak havoc on nearby tissues. In 2016, there was a study published in the journal Critical Reviews in Oncology by Chang and Yang, and they both lay out this concept very clearly. They show that hyperglycemia, think uncontrolled blood sugar, creates a perfect storm. It fuels cancer cells directly by providing glucose and indirectly by generating AGEs. These AGEs stiffen the extracellular matrix, the scaffolding that you find around cells, making it much easier for tumors to invade and spread. Plus, in this context, ages bind to the receptor, RAGE, and it kicks off signaling cascades that promote cell proliferation and survival. It's like giving cancer cells a megaphone and a map to metastasize. But it's not just about the tumor itself. Glycation also creates a microenvironment that's cancer friendly. Ages trigger oxidative stress, as we've talked about before, and inflammation. Both of these can damage DNA and destabilize cells, potentially kickstarting malignant transformation. Now, that was shown in another recent study. In 2018, there was a study in the journal Seminars in Cancer Biology, and the authors dig into this concept. They focus on methylglyoxal. That is a glycation byproduct. And the authors found that methylglyoxal-derived agents enhance tumor growth and metastasis by activating pathways like YAP, which drive aggressive cancer behaviors. Now, this brings us to metastasis or metastasis, the spread of cancer to distant sites. Glycation might be a key player here as well. Ages remodel the extracellular matrix, making it much more permissive for cancer cells to break free and invade other tissues. They also upregulate proteins like S100A4. That is a protein that's linked to metastatic behavior. As noted in a 2023 review in the Journal of Endocrine Reviews. This study highlighted how RAGE signaling in the tumor microenvironment supports cancer stem cells, which are notorious for driving the recurrence and spread of cancer. So let's zoom in next on inflammation, because this is where glycation really turns up the heat. Inflammation is like the body's alarm system. It's useful in a very short burst, but disastrous when it becomes chronic. Cancer thrives in a chronically inflamed environment, and glycation is a master at keeping that fire burning. Ages binding to RAGE will activate many inflammatory pathways. One of the most common would be those that are managed by a molecule called NF-kappa B. NF-kappa B is a transcription factor that's like the conductor of an inflammation orchestra. NF-kappa B ramps up the production of cytokines that cause inflammation. Think of cytokines like IL-6, TNF-alpha, and IL-1 beta. These not only fuel cancer growth, but they also suppress anti-inflammatory tumor immunity. In 2005, 20 years ago, there was a study in the journal called Glycobiology, and the researchers nail this down. They show that age-RAGE interactions drive chronic inflammation across many diseases, including cancer. Certain cancers are particularly tied to inflammation. You would imagine in this case pancreatic cancer, but also cancers that affect the liver, colorectal, and gastric areas. These are often called inflammation-driven cancers because chronic inflammation from things like hepatitis or inflammatory bowel disease sets the stage for cancer. Glycation makes it even worse. For example, in pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, that's PDAC, one of the deadliest cancers, hyperglycemia and ages amplify inflammation, which drives key tumor progression. A journal in 2020 was the venue. The journal was Frontiers in Oncology. And in that venue, the researchers show that there was abnormal glucose metabolism in PDAC patients. And that abnormal metabolism increased cytokine production, like IL-6 in this case, which fuels invasion and metastatic cancer. Liver cancer or hepatocellular carcinoma is another example. Chronic inflammation from conditions like hepatitis or fatty liver disease is a major driver, and glycation piles on. Ages increase oxidative stress and matrix remodeling, in the process, creating a tumor-friendly environment. Colorectal and gastric cancers follow a very similar pattern. In this case, glycation's inflammatory effects make an already bad situation much worse, and in the process, it pushes cells toward malignancy. So that brings us to this idea of insulin resistance. This pivot to insulin resistance is important because this is the thread that ties glycation and cancer together. If you're new to the term, let's review. Insulin resistance is when your cells stop responding properly to insulin. That's the hormone that shuttles glucose into cells. Your pancreas compensates for this effect by pumping out even more insulin, leading to a condition known as hyperinsulinemia, or high insulin levels. Often, in addition to hyperinsulinemia, hyperglycemia follows. Both of these are bad news for glycation and cancer. So why is insulin resistance a problem? Well, for one, it drives hyperglycemia, which, as we've seen, fuels glycation and age formation. But it also does much more than that. It creates a pro-cancer environment. High insulin levels activate pathways like PI3K and AKT, which promote cell growth and survival, exactly what cancers love. Plus, insulin resistance often comes with chronic inflammation and oxidative stress. We've talked about this already. These further amplify cancer risk. In 2012, there was a study published in the journal Biomed Research International, and the researchers tried to make the link clear. They show that insulin resistance through hyperinsulinemia and age-rage signaling impairs insulin signaling and promotes inflammation, in the process setting the stage for cancer. In tissues like the liver, the pancreas, and the breast, this creates a vicious cycle where glycation and inflammation feed each other, driving tumor progression. Uncontrolled blood sugar is the kicker. So when glucose levels are high, glycation runs rampant, producing AGEs that damage proteins, DNA, and other molecules. This damage can trigger mutations, or what's also known as epigenetic changes, that push cells toward cancer. In breast cancer, let's talk about that one as an example. Insulin resistance and hyperglycemia are linked to worse outcomes, and that was shown in a 2018 study in the journal Clinical and Experimental Medicine. Good glycemic control, on the other hand, improves prognosis, thus highlighting how tightly blood sugar and cancer are linked. So we've painted a pretty grim picture. Glycation, inflammation, insulin resistance, and cancer are all holding hands. But here's the good news: you're not powerless. There are evidence-based strategies to break this cycle and protect your health. So let's cover those next. The first item of maybe 6 or so we can cover is to control blood sugar. The number one way to reduce glycation is to keep your blood sugar in check. This means a low glycemic diet. Think whole foods, plenty of fiber, healthy fats, and moderate protein. Avoid refined carbohydrates and sugary drinks. Exercise is also key. That will improve your insulin sensitivity and lower glucose levels. In 2019, in a study published in the Journal of Endocrine Society, they show that reducing hyperglycemia cuts age formation and inflammation, which both can work to lower your cancer risk. Number two, let's boost antioxidant defenses. Glycation generates oxidative stress, so load up on antioxidants. Foods that are rich in vitamins C and E, think of berries, leafy greens, nuts, those types of things, can neutralize free radicals. Compounds like quercetin, that is found primarily in onions and apples, have also shown to inhibit age formation, as noted in 2015, a study published in the International Journal of Biological Molecules. The third thing you can do is consider anti-glycation compounds. Some compounds can show promise in blocking glycation. Aminoguanidine, for example, will trap reactive carbonyls, and those are the molecules that are intermediates in the formation of ages. Though it's not widely used, this idea of aminoguanidine, due to its side effects that we can talk about another time. Natural options like rutin and quercetin are safer bets for sure. Now, some are using metformin. That's a diabetes drug. It has also been shown to reduce ages by lowering glucose and improving insulin sensitivity. But as always, it is imperative that you talk to your doctor about these, especially if you're at risk for insulin resistance or cancer. The fourth item you could think about is to reduce dietary ages. Ages aren't just made in your body, they're also found in your food, especially in processed, high heat cooked items like fried foods and sugary snacks. This is considered to be exogenous age formation. Opt instead for cooking methods like steaming or poaching when possible, and eat more fresh and whole foods. In 2008, there was a study in the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine, and the researchers in that case found that low-age diets improve insulin sensitivity. And when that happens, you reduce inflammation, which lowers cancer risk. And that brings us to the fifth item that you could consider, that is to manage inflammation. Chronic inflammation is a cancer enabler, so tackle it head on. An anti-inflammatory diet, for instance, some enjoy the Mediterranean style diet with fish, olive oil, and veggies. That has shown to help stave off cancer incidence rates. Omega-3 supplements can also help. Stress reduction techniques like meditation also dial inflammation. So look into each of these avenues in addition to exercise, again, which is a superstar here, because they all work together to lower inflammatory cytokines. And the sixth thing I might mention is to screen and monitor. If you have insulin resistance, diabetes, or a family history of cancer, you need to stay vigilant. Regular screenings for cancers like pancreatic, liver, or colorectal cancers can catch issues early. The link between glycation is also worthy of monitoring. So monitor your A1C levels and fasting glucose, because that will keep tabs on blood sugar that fuels cancer. So we've covered a lot today: glycation, cancer, inflammation, insulin resistance, and how they're all tangled up in this big metabolic mess. But the takeaway is this: your metabolism is a battlefield, and glycation is a weapon that cancer can exploit. So controlling blood sugar, reducing inflammation, and making smart lifestyle choices can help disarm that weapon and stack the odds in your favor. This matters because it's not just about living longer, it's about living better with energy, clarity, and resilience. The science is clear and the tools are in your hands. So take what you've learned today, share it with someone you care about, and let's keep the conversation going. And finally, as always, stay curious. Keep learning about your metabolic health, because knowledge can prepare you to better take care of your cells, your tissues, and your metabolism. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time.